market is on edge. Humans are on edge because of this instinctual doomerism right now. And
if you have 50% of the population that's unemployed that can't afford the mortgage that they easily qualified for when they took it out 5 years ago or whatever, that the artificial intelligence tools can really help us, leverage and get there a lot faster than you might otherwise, or you might not ever, think about how to get there at all.
Silicon, the material that is put into chips, is ultimately made of sand. Episode 79 of the award-winning Market Moves with Marc and Jeff, two uninteresting guys continuing to talk about very interesting times. Jeff, really good to be with you today.
I always look forward to these markets. It's great to be here. I had a friend ask me if we were able to convince Dr. Yoon to come on and talk to us because of our award-winning status, and I told him that I thought he had committed to doing that even before the Buzzy Award was announced. So I don't know if we can claim that as the reason or not, but it's been fun to have exposure and just have interesting conversations with people as a result of having the podcast in place.
Look, and I got to tell you, Jeff, while it isn't financial advice, of course it is not. You are making money if you are acting on market moves. Opinions here. Open Door, the day of earnings we recorded was at $4.68 and jumped up some 13% after earnings. Today it sits at $5.28 a share. Not bad for a week's work here. There have been some interesting interviews that their CEO Kaz has done. I've been watching that. I'm really interested when I start nibbling at a stock one way or another. It provides incentive to start researching more deeply, and that certainly happened with me here. And I was interested to hear kind of the origin story of how Kaz got interested in Open Door, what they're trying to do, but said on a plane ride 4 or 5 hours, he dove into the history of the company well before any job consideration, and just got angry with what was a really valuable mission, which is kind of creating home ownership or making it easier to own a home, with how it ended up being managed during all the COVID stuff and going public and whatnot. So there they are, making a lot of improvement. I think they launched a AI-derived mortgage product this week. Cool. I'm watching it. I won't talk any more about it this week, but I'm continuing to like what I'm seeing on a number of levels, and just I guess wanted to share that and of course pat myself on the back.
How much are they down from their recent high, Mark? It might kind of depend on the timing, on which you're listening to us as well.
For sure. Yeah, I think it was up to $11 a share, not just a few weeks ago or months ago. Our advice, or at least the opinion then, was that was a little high and a little out of control here. But anyway, between the Fannie Mae run up and Open Door run up, here we are. We're doing all right.
For sure. Well, I am observing that your approach to taking interest in it is kind of following Kaz's, and I'm hoping that you're not looking to jump ship and join those guys anytime soon, because I listened to part of the interview, not all of it, but it was really interesting to hear how he got interested in it, and then ends up as the CEO there, just because like you said, he was not happy with the way that it was managed, even though he saw a lot of value in the process. And so it's fun. It's almost hard not to kind of become obsessive a little bit with some of these things as you see a real, opportunity for a company or an opportunity to disrupt a market in some way. I'm kidding, of course, about you ending up over there, but it was interesting to hear how he became very obsessive with it, talking about it with his wife and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I generally think companies are better off with really passionate CEOs that are I don't know. I think the trajectory of how they got to where they are, whether it's founder or not, you see a lot of folks that just do a really good job with this, and a lot of it can be initiated by really clearly vision talented people, and he seems to be one of them. There are plenty out there. So I'm having a lot of fun watching it. And Jeff, a lot of the genesis of this podcast was that you and I have passions about business, about modernization, about disruption, and we just consume this kind of information as a hobby more than anything. And at times we would talk about it or share links one way or another to different podcasts, articles, studies, whatever it is. And this podcast really has become a distillation between you and I of what we're seeing out there. And we thought we would use the episode this week to do a little bit of that. Maybe a funny genesis of how we got to this. Jeff and I have multiple speaking engagements booked this week or this year. And one of them is just sort of brainstorming with us a topic centered around practical AI use in appraisal practice and whatnot. But it was specifically saying that it will not be AI futurism in speculation. And Jeff and I kind of laughed at ourselves like, well, that kind of is our specialty is AI futurism speculation. And so we thought we'd talk a little bit about that today. Why do you think talking about this, what might be, what may never be, Jeff, why is that important for us to be considering here?
Boy, as I listen to conversations from people much smarter than me, and we'll get into some of these, Marc Andreessen and others recently that we'll be talking about, I think it's just an important way to try to digest and understand what's actually happening around us and try to prepare for what might be potential outcomes. I think it was in a conversation with that Marc Andreessen had that you and I have listened to recently, where he said, look, if you go back and listen to, or he's like, it's really easy to look up news articles in the late 90s and early 2000s talking about the evolution of the internet and what it was going to be and what it wasn't going to be. And his observation is that most people were far more wrong than they were right as far as predicting how it was actually going to play out in the short term and in the long term. But to me, Mark, it doesn't minimize the value of trying to understand what's happening. Nobody really knows what the AI landscape, what the tech landscape is going to look like, specifically years down the road. Those that say they do, I think are probably trying to sell something more often than not. And so for me, it's like, look, there's positive, outcomes I think that will come from this. There's potential risks, and I think will be some negative outcomes. I think there's some middle ground or some likely scenarios that can come out, but trying to think through as granularly as possible, what is the technology, how does it work, what might it lead to, for me, helps me to better understand it and at least start trying to ask the right questions about it, in the near term to prepare for whatever the future might be as it unfolds for us.
Boy, I think about Teddy Roosevelt's "Man in the Arena" quote, Jeff, and it is. I think all of our listeners generally are in the arena. A lot of small business, solo entrepreneur types, and I think what a place to be, right? Not on the sidelines watching all of this, but it is really, really hard a lot to be in the arena. You have to take the information that is available, make decisions on the fly, and pay the consequences, both good and bad, whatever you decide while you're in the arena. And I take a lot of pride being in the arena. It is definitely very difficult a lot of the times. And I almost feel like it's more difficult today. Not almost, I 100% think it's more difficult today because of the unknown and uncertain future that AI is bringing to all of us right now. There is a boatload of doomerism, very little, which I think is human nature, is the doomerism, very little of the optimism. And what do you make of all of this? And it can almost kill your drive to try and react at all or try to progress and iterate at all. And the only way to iterate intelligently is to try and digest the entire universe of what's going on, so that when you do make a decision where you face the consequences one way or another, where you've got is stacked deck as possible. Your own personal LLM in your mind is using the data that's out there to kind of spit out a next word guess that's more likely to be right.
Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to accomplish. And I like that you referenced, Teddy Roosevelt's, imagery. And I almost feel like that is even more pronounced and probably relevant today, because in a world of interconnectedness and especially social media, you've got everybody in the world has an opinion and is willing to share it, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on X, on, pick your platform. And there's plenty of criticism, there's plenty of doomerism to go around, and those that are in the arena trying things, testing things, learning as you go, in some ways doing it, maybe as publicly as ever has been done. I mean, there's certainly risk. I mean, you almost have to be, and appraisers kind of have to have this anyway, a little bit of a thick skin, and just do what you think is best and is right, and try to, to learn as you go. But man, the nature of learning is failing and iterating and improving and then moving forward. And, there are plenty of business stories, of companies that almost didn't make it until they did. And I think that's true of, of almost learning anything. And in this rapidly evolving tech landscape, you learn and you try stuff, and not everything works out, and some things are much harder to undo than others. Although, an interview that Jeff Bezos did, gave some pretty good insight into his perspective around making decisions generally. I mean, he's a fan of making decisions quickly, especially when they're what he calls two-way doors, where it's not that big of a deal to undo the decision or to pivot and then do something different. The more of one-way doors are things that are really, really hard to undo or very expensive to redo structurally. Those you need to slow down and make sure that you've got the right data and are making the best decision that you can. But it's just fascinating to hear the perspective and the paradigm from people who have succeeded in a large scale, and through these rapidly shifting evolutions. Amazon was ready to and capitalized as much as anybody in the cloud compute evolution of technology. And so it's fascinating to see how some of these kind of players in the arena at the highest scales think and attack some of these problems.
It is so important, Jeff, I think, to understand human history and reaction to world-changing technologies that are coming, and understand what our instinctual reaction is to these things, because it is wild doomerism every which way. And if you're familiar with those things and you think back, you could think about the digital photography as for instance, just going to ruin photography generally, and we've had so much creativity and artistic capability arise from that on all sorts of fronts. You just can't predict how all this stuff is going to go. But I find that those that have studied human history and these technological developments, they see very clearly that human instinct is to be totally doomer about it, that the whole world is going to change for the far worse. And so if you see that is our reaction as a species, and then it doesn't end up that way, you could view AI, and probably should view AI, maybe the more wise view of it is that our instinct is to say it's going to be awful and no one's going to have a job and be horrible from that standpoint. But know that history says it's going to be quite different than that. There's going to be a lot of positives that are really hard to see. And the printing press, I was just looking at this, Jeff. They thought the printing press was going to cause ignorance. Was one of the expectations. You're not going to be hand copying things in the same way and studying deeply. Automobiles, railroads were the work of the devil. I see described here in just kind of a quick chat reference. Electricity and invisible deaths, and all sorts of things that are viewed here as really negative. And so we're kind of in that right now. And the worst part is that this change is proliferating so quickly amongst us. And so I think as a zoomed out perspective, I think it's really good to be visiting this often, so that we can make good decisions. And I think our listenership, appraisal is certainly that, but real estate generally is a very entrepreneurial deal. And so you're often not just an employee at a company who is being told which product you're going to use or not. A parent of a kid on one of my kids' baseball teams saying, yeah, they just gave us all ChatGPT this week. I got to learn how to do that sort of thing. So the decision's been made for them to jump into it. But a lot of our listeners have to decide if it's a worthwhile effort on their own to jump into these things. So it's hard to make those decisions without the full perspective.
It is, it is. And I really think that you're hitting on something important, just citing those examples from history. It is so hard to put yourself back in, and if you were never there, we talk about electricity or the evolution of things that predated anybody listening to this podcast. it's hard to fully understand and appreciate the perspective of what was the perceived downsides and negativities, that obviously didn't play out, but they were very real concerns at the time, right? And so, when you just look back or rewind the scale just a little bit, there were a lot of concern around COVID, and the pandemic. And unfortunately, it turned out to, it's kind of run its course, right? But some of the worst predictions, if you look at headlines of, what could have been outcomes or whatever, like we look at it and said, man, we did some silly things at the time. We probably didn't need to keep as many kids away from school and do as some of the things that we did, but we just didn't know any better until we had more time and research and data that came forward on it. Obviously, there are political implications and stuff like that too, but even in relatively recent history, I find myself kind of putting that in the past and minimizing some of the risks that we were concerned about. And fortunately, it didn't play out. The mortality rate wasn't as bad as they worried that it could be at some point. Pretty transmissible, but not, and certainly people died from it, but not as bad as they were worrying that it could be. And I think that artificial intelligence, we're living this now of, man, what's it going to mean? Is it, because you have some that say, it's going to lead to abundance. Everything's going to be way cheaper. Everybody's going to be way better off and just doing whatever you want because you're not going to have to work nearly as much. And you've got the entire opposite perspective of that it's going to take all of the jobs and you're not going to be working because you can't. And, only a few are going to accrue all of the value out of the build out of artificial intelligence. And, I suspect we land somewhere in the middle, but it's just we're living right now one of these, kind of human evolutions that have been the story of humanity. And we just don't fully appreciate the concerns that people had when you kind of know how things actually played out in the past versus when you're today looking forward.
Well, yeah, boy, with that knowledge, over the last couple of weeks, we have had a lot of doomerism pieces come out or news items one way or another, Jeff. And so let's talk a little bit about the downside that's being projected out into the news wires and social media and that sort of thing. And, the first has been that every time Claude announces a new tool that generally seems to be directly pointed at a particular service, like software as a service sort of thing, that they almost could fund the building of data centers by shorting the stock of the software company that their tool is going to replace. Because as soon as they announce the new tool, what it's designed to do, we're seeing 20% drops in different softwares that are out there. And what an interesting thing. And so the market is on edge. Humans are on edge because of this instinctual doomerism right now. And what an interesting concept to fund your data center build outs by shorting stocks of tools that you are replacing within your system one way or another. And I don't think the 20% are lasting very long, but I think the trade would be just short the stock for 3 days, get out, and then go do the next thing. So we have that out there. I think Dario, the CEO from Anthropic, just said by like end of next year that 50% of white collar jobs are gone. So you've got all these guys, and there's a lot of salesmanship in that, I think. But what really caught the world, and I think last Friday was being blamed for the stock market being down 2 or 3%, was this Citrini Research piece, which was a really interesting perspective. And we could show a picture of that, Jeff, just of the beginning of the article here. We will link to it in the show notes. It is titled The 2028 Global Intelligence Crisis. And essentially, the article, or the author of the article, is sitting at a fictional 2028 perch, looking back on the last 2.5 years and saying, basically with the following thesis, that AI has been a little bit more successful than we think it will be today. And so it is a long article talking about, like, example by example of what this looks like, what happens to business, what happens to society, what happens to real estate. Didn't paint a real pretty picture, Jeff. I'll turn it to you maybe to tell us a little bit about some of the specifics, if you can recall.
Yeah, you bet. And it's to set this up, I would suggest people read it. I would suggest that you read it with a healthy perspective. And they made it pretty clear that this is not a prediction. They weren't predicting this is how it's going to play out, but described it more as a thought exercise, which I think was valuable from that perspective. And, just one of the aspects that you touched on, Mark, was the impact on real estate. One of the concerns or possible scenarios that they lay out is that if artificial intelligence leads to significant productivity gains and job losses, then you end up with this kind of downward spiral of people out of jobs, not able to make their mortgage payments, defaulting on and not performing, and it ultimately a large downward kind of transition in real estate, because you have a lot of unemployed people that can't pay their mortgage anymore, and then that becomes self-reinforcing. I mean, somewhat in the vein of what we saw in the great financial crisis, where once values start dropping precipitously, people that are way upside down in their homes at that point decided not to, just a lot of them did. What's the point in keeping the home if I'm 20 or 30 or 40% underwater and don't see any path to getting out of it? Not the same reasons, but kind of a similar outcome that they were projecting in this thought exercise is if you have 50% of the population that's unemployed that can't afford the mortgage that they easily qualified for when they took it out 5 years ago or whatever, it led to a potentially massive decrease in values as a result of all of the mortgages that were underwater. Just as one example, is like a downward spiral of things that it was projecting. What other examples stood out to you, Mark, as far as what they were highlighting?
The real estate example that you spoke of, Jeff, you've got unsupported mortgages, maybe half of the $13 trillion in mortgages that are out there, did stand out to me. And maybe, just like a one potential outcome that could be a little bit surprising is that, this would paint a picture of real estate mortgage being a mess. And I imagine on some level that this would extend the useful life of the appraiser. You got to sort out the mess. You got to figure out through that. And it's probably pretty complicated. It probably isn't just an algorithm. And, so maybe the utility of the appraiser is safeguarded in that scenario. I think the thing that struck me the most is while it's happening quickly, it is a gradual change, gradual in a change every month. And it was that companies to stave off death are having to, you will survive longer the deeper you implement artificial intelligence into your business. By doing that, you are cutting workforce, and you are also guaranteeing the proliferation of AI that will ultimately kill your business, right? And so it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy, but that people couldn't get out of the way of it because it's either die tomorrow or die 18 months from now. Well, you're going to choose the extra 18 months, and to survive, you've got to employ AI. And so there's pieces of that resonate with me quite a bit. You could see that going, and on some level, you almost feel like we're feeling a pull in that direction today.
Yeah, you bet. And even just recently, was it Box that was the tech company? The CEO announced layoffs of like 40% of their people, citing specifically artificial intelligence or intelligence tools as the reason for, hey, we're just going to make the hard decision today and do what we think is going to naturally happen over time. Anyway, I mean, it's almost eerie, to hear or see that come out, after this Citrini kind of research thought experiment did, in the real world where it's actually happening. And probably worth pointing out that I don't think that this is automatically the way that things go. There's a polar opposite perspective on this. And, from what you led the conversation out with, Mark, I think it's worth exploring, what are possibility or possible outcomes one way or the other to try to position yourself as best you can to understand them. And I found myself reading this, saying, man, it's interesting to see how those dots could logically connect from agents and artificial intelligence really replacing the workforce much faster than we're sitting here today thinking that it's going to, and what are the knock-on effects of that happening. There are those that I think can draw logical connections to an opposite scenario of that as well, but I think it all highlights the difficulty in projecting what the future holds, because you can make a credible case it's going to be terrible and everybody's going to be unemployed, and you can make the alternative case that it's going to lead to significant wage growth and increase as well if I'm 10 times or 100 times more productive with intelligence tools than I was, without them. So it's fun, but it's challenging to try to understand, where these things might lead us, even in the short term of 12 and 18 months from now.
On the topic of like self-fulfilling prophecy, so Block is very timely, like this long letter from Jack Dorsey. I saw the CEO of Block, who was announcing the layoffs. 10,000 employees before the layoffs, 6,000 after. So they're laying off almost 40%. Interesting, long, very thoughtful letter to the 4,000 being laid off. Very, very thoughtful, and they had the means to have a very humane severance package for folks. The entire letter was written with no case. It was like not case sensitive. It's just all lowercase. Just interesting. What a world we're in. And, on the topic of this self-fulfilling prophecy, so basically what he was saying, Jeff, is like, look, we're laying off 40% of our workforce. This is not a sign that the company is struggling. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We are in a very strong position, doing better today than we've ever done. Software tools are such that we just don't need this many people, that the organization is getting much flatter, that the capabilities of top engineers, software engineers are maximizing. So we just don't need this many. And we could slowly whittle this down over a year plus, but that hurts morale. We can't do that. And in the self-fulfilling prophecy of AI being implemented here, I guess kind of as you might expect, Jeff, but if you are not sacrificing revenue, but reducing your expenses, your employment expenses by 40%, well, the stock market loved it last night. So this is announced, and the stock market, the stock was up 30%. And if you're running any other company out there and contemplating this, the reward in the market is like, oh man, yeah, go. This is what you should be doing. This is responsible management. It's optimizing your employees and your expense structure and all of that. So others have to look at this and say, well, I should be moving in this direction too if I want to see some uptick in my stock price too, which is what most leadership is in charge of doing, is increasing the stock price, Jeff. So there it is, the flywheel or incentive structure to create the self-fulfilling prophecy just in the last 24 hours on display.
Yeah, and I saw some commentary about that, Mark, saying that, historically, mass layoffs were a sign of a company struggling and would have the opposite effect on the stock price, would drive it down because it was a sign that they were not, where they needed to be, they were overemployed or whatever, and definitely the opposite, reaction in this case. Not terribly surprising. I mean, if I'm a stockholder in their company and see, man, they're doing as well as they ever have and are showing a pathway to even greater profitability, that probably warrants, some increase in stock price. It does stand out to me that, for a SaaS company, that very logically follows. I don't know that it applies equally to all companies and business models, like a service company, for example, like a lot of people are in real estate. You got to have the working professionals to be able to offer the service. It's not, all, binary bits and bytes that are ultimately the service. And so I don't know that automatically applies equally across the board, as far as that goes. But just a crazy scenario where in the past that would not have been a sign of strength and of good things to come for the company. And yet, like you say, in 24 hours, it's made a huge difference in the market's perception of where they're at and where they're going.
You bet. And, I think to close out some of the downside discussion is, the debate in our favorite podcast, which is the All In podcast. We'll be talking about some other venture capitalist types that we like to listen to. These are very interesting business philosophers to listen to because of their job, which is seeing macro and then sometimes double clicking in of all aspects of most markets, and so they just have this really wide and deep breadth of experience, wisdom, and insight into what's going on. So all of these guys are really interesting, and I think that's been a real benefit of the internet and podcasting over the last decade. It's really, these guys have really found their voice, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. But listening to these four venture capitalists argue about doomerism or not. David Sachs is the czar of artificial intelligence and crypto for the America at this point. And Calacanis is saying, man, we're losing jobs every which way. How do you say this is not going to create unemployment largely? He's using OpenClaw a lot in Blown Away, starting to invest in any ideas surrounding OpenClaw, employing it in his office quite a bit. So we're 4,000 layoffs blamed on AI yesterday. That's just the latest one. We certainly aren't done with it.
Yeah, 100%. And so what does it lead to? I mean, the reality is we don't know exactly, but I do think that it makes sense. And I think, Mark, that both things can be true, that there will be AI-related layoffs and that it won't necessarily result in a collapse of employment for white-collar workers across the company or across the country, generally. Now, I mean, we might look up in 2 years and have this Citrini article actually be a lot closer to home than we hope or think in the moment, but there is a counter perspective on that. And on the All In podcast, the perspective is also offered that, if a worker is significantly more productive and therefore profitable, you're going to want more of them, not less. Now, that's not the case in this one isolated scenario, but I can see where if I can do 3 or 4 or 10 times the amount of work that I was able to do without intelligence tools, that I become more valuable to the company or to myself or whatever my employment situation is. So I think it's not necessarily all doom and gloom, but I do think there's the need to be adaptive and adaptable to leveraging the tools, because those that aren't leveraging the tools, I think are far more likely to be in the category of those that end up getting laid off.
Which brings us, Jeff, to the upside side of this story, and a podcast that I would encourage all of our listeners to find the time to sit through, probably about an hour. We will link it in the show notes. I actually, Jeff, don't even know the name of the podcast. We will have a screenshot here that will show you. It's with Marc Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz. Real AI Boom hasn't even started yet is essentially the title of the article or of the podcast. The fellow on the left, I don't remember his name. You'll have the link. And I am advising you to go check this out. So Marc, first of all, I don't drink coffee before you listen to this, Jeff. I know you aren't a coffee drinker. I think I ate my meal faster listening to this. This guy talks incredibly fast. You almost listen and think that breathing is a distraction to him. It slows him down. But dang, does he just has such a wide perspective of the AI landscape, such deep experience, and all comes across as wisdom. I think very much heavily relying on the study of human history to say, look, our natural reaction is to think this is terrible. I don't think this is going this way at all. In fact, I think this is going to make us far more productive, and that is nothing but good for the entire world. It will drop prices materially, which has the effect of raising everybody's wages because it just will cost dramatically less to live. But I think that the principal takeaway from this for me and for the real estate professional is that there may not be a lot of room for average, but if you are awesome at what you do, this will maximize and help you leverage what you are really good at. So it's right now in software engineers, but it'll be this example in all sorts of industries out there, that people will become way more productive. And getting really good at something is probably your biggest key to success, and maybe even getting good at a couple of things, right? Don't just completely niche, but be able to combine two expertises. One way or another, is expertise or expertises, I don't know. Get really good at these things, and there is a real path forward for workers out there, I guess. You got takeaways, Jeff?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would emphasize what you said, that really interesting listen. For me, listening to him, definitely different personalities, but was kind of in the vein of listening to someone like a Jeff Bezos or an Elon Musk, who you can tell have thought very deeply about what it is they're talking about and really have a lot of wisdom on the topic. And in the vein of what you were just referencing, Mark, he cites the example of Dilbert, who was the cartoon artist, and just highlights that the author of the Dilbert cartoon had said, he could have been an okay cartoonist and he could have been an okay business person, but because he had skills in both of those very different, very unique, kind of areas that you wouldn't expect to cross over, but because he did and could cross over, that was the only thing that allowed him to be as successful as he was running the Dilbert cartoon, for years and years and years, as successful as he did, because he had a deep understanding of the business landscape and could then transpose that into cartoons, basically, in a way that was interesting, in a way that resonated with people. And he said, if I was only one of those things, I would have been okay, but not great. But because I had understanding in both, it allowed me to do something totally unique. And I think, as it relates to real estate, I think that the artificial intelligence tools are going to allow us to find verticals and experience, that will allow us to, I hope, in a similar way, find some kind of niche opportunities to connect with and provide value to people out there in the space. I mean, lots of people can write appraisal reports, lots of people can represent buyers and sellers, but it was interesting hearing him discuss, and then he correlates that to in the software space, designers and coders and project managers, that each have kind of a unique space, but because of the lift that artificial intelligence can give them, it can allow them to be good at multiple things much faster than they might have otherwise. And I think that there's some real parallels in the real estate space as well. I mean, can you be good at real estate valuation and then at communicating that, through a podcast? And if anybody's good at that, they could reach out and give us some pointers, maybe, Mark, on doing the podcast well. But how can you then pivot or use that thing that you're good at to then be good at some related or tangential approach? And the point was that the artificial intelligence tools can really help us, leverage and get there a lot faster than you might otherwise, or you might not ever, think about how to get there at all.
You bet. Yeah. I was thinking, Jeff, I know sports and I know appraisal. I'm not really sure how to combine those. I've got to get creative here, one way or another.
Well, I will tell you, Mark, there's a lot of value issues in sports. It's fascinating to me, for example, what teams pay for players, what teams are valued at. It blows my mind, but I've often found myself wondering, what are the revenue streams for an NFL team that drive that value? And is it all a financial calculation of my revenue is X and I'm paying a multiple, therefore my value is Y? Or is there also some intrinsic value as well, just the cool factor of owning an NFL team? I kind of get the sense that a lot of those valuations have been based, at least had that as a component. There's been some, blue sky or some value aspect that goes beyond just the dollars and cents coming in the door from those teams.
It is interesting, Jeff, that now that we talk about that, you think about two very disconnected things, and right off the cuff, you were able to connect the two. And I live in Cypress, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. And just last week, the Houston Texans announced something called the Toro District in a master plan community in Cypress called Bridgeland. And it's an 80-acre development. The Texans are moving their headquarters there. They have a practice facility and retail and living and shopping and all of this coming together. So, just the top of my head there's another example of real estate valuation and sports coming together. What an interesting thing.
Yeah, it really is. When the Raiders came to Vegas, I'll just note this quickly too. It was fascinating, but there's some mountain communities a couple hours outside of Las Vegas, and I heard realtors speculating that they might get NFL players in the market for some of those properties. Turned out that they actually were and have impacted values and pricing and even demand for the type of homes that are built in some of those areas. We may have to brainstorm a little bit on how we can consult with some of those folks in the sports space as it relates to real estate and valuation.
You bet. So Jeff, along the lines of, and I think this is maybe the second time on this podcast I've kind of had the advice to our listeners, stop listening to Jeff and I and go listen to Marc Andreessen. He is just a wealth of knowledge in this, and so this is certainly true of that. And a quote from, I think, Naval Ravikant or Ravikant. I don't know how to say his last name. Yeah. What is it?
Ravikant, I think.
Ravikant. So yeah, was this that talking about AI, that there is no demand for average moving forward. The best apps win 100% of the category. everybody else gets nothing. And that's a little absolutist, and I'm not sure it's exactly that. In the best app wins, and I thought it was really interesting that that's referring to applications on a cell phone or whatever. But I think this is going to be true for appraisal and appraisers one way or another. And in how we define the best appraisers is probably well beyond the tightest value that's out there. There's a lot more to it than serving a client well. But I think this is going to be true with real estate agents and mortgage professionals and all sorts. I do think that the AI lift, I'm concerned today about using AI too deeply in developing my opinion of value. I am more intrigued about using AI in helping me deliver that opinion of value. So there is I don't know. It's how we use it, how it can help us. I think is still to be determined here, Jeff. But I think there is most likely an optimistic outcome.
Yeah, I do too, Mark. And as you're describing that, I think that you've always had this observed 80-20 rule, where you've got a smaller percentage of a total population that tend to account for a majority of the production or productivity. That's definitely the case with real estate agents. I mean, you get sales teams and those that do a majority of the volume. When we talked with Dr. Yoon, I mean, it was brought up that some agents haven't done a single transaction or have done very few, and I think that those that are the most successful and forward-looking, today, whether it's agents or appraisers, are looking to say, here is technology, what can I do and how can I do it? And I think the thing I find is that some of them are thinking about it even differently than I would think about it, for example. And so, I continue to try to have conversations with people who are thinking about, the technology in different ways. I think it was you that shared an example with me of somebody who had an open claw that was out there making offers at like 70% below the listing prices of homes in some Florida market or something. I think he had framed it as just like messing with the homeowners or something, or trying to reshape their expectations of, man, what's up with this? I'm getting offers at 70% less than what I'm asking for it. Now, none of those, were turned around and were accepted at that point. And it may have just been a facetious or a silly example of something that somebody was doing with OpenClaw. But, there are lots of things, that kind of got me thinking, like, what could you be doing if you were actually more serious about, getting accepted offers or something, with the ability to just prolifically put out offers on properties, at, maybe a 20% discount or whatever you set your investment criteria to be. There are lots of cool things that I'm always fascinated what people even think to try to do with the tools that you would never be able to do if you had to do it all manually yourself.
You bet, man. I don't know if we've done enough service to the optimistic side there, Jeff. I think there is going to be a lot of change, and change can be painful because winners of the past may not be winners of the future. And, so it is important to be aware on the cusp of this, to be testing. I think one of the things that I find is to not dig your heels too deeply into a decision while you're in the arena, because in this environment, things are changing so stinking fast. And my firm has not developed a lot of specific IP, our firm, Jeff, and intentionally, and we haven't. But boy, I feel like that's been a strong decision at this point, because the access to building our own at this point is dramatically reduced and become more accessible. And I couldn't have known that to this degree in the beginning, but here we are. So there's just keeping flexibility, being willing to maybe there's not direct benefit to jumping in and testing certain new technologies that are out there right now. Or I'm building this knowing that it probably will be obsolete and I won't ultimately use it 2 years from now. But just the practice of spinning it up gives me a much deeper perspective to allow me to make the ultimate and right decision when the time comes.
Yeah, and on that topic of optimism, Mark, it's exactly what you're saying. 3 years ago, or in a prolific artificial intelligence world, those options weren't even on the table. We weren't thinking about, man, maybe I just spin something up to learn how to do it so that I'm better at it next time. The investment and the cost to do that was dramatically higher. And if you want kind of a comprehensive case for the upside or a positive future with artificial intelligence, go and listen to this podcast specifically that Marc Andreessen did. You're going to get about 3 hours of content in an hour and a half. I was the same way. Like hearing him talk, I was like, holy crap. Yeah. Breathing is, an unnecessary, an impediment, necessary, but not desired. It seemed like from, the way that he just speaks and delivers. But, it really stood out to me that he, and I've heard a few others, kind of make this argument as well. An economist from RGB Bank, I think is the name of the bank, had done an interview a couple of weeks ago on a Wall Street Journal, like a weekly podcast that they do. And some of the underlying theories or thesis that they have is that, we're already at record low unemployment right now. When you step back and look at demographic changes in the developed world, you look at birth rates and like population growth in the United States and in all of the developed Western economies, people aren't even replacing themselves. Like the population is diminishing. And so you get net in migration from people from other countries that want to move in or be there. But, what Andreessen and others, are arguing is that we need a workforce in 20 and 30 years from now. And if we're not replacing ourselves today, who's going to fill a lot of these jobs that are filled by humans? His argument is basically that artificial intelligence and where we think robotics is going to be in the near future is coming at the exact right time. It's perfect timing because, we're not a growing population in society in most of the developed world. And so this is actually going to offset what would otherwise be a really problematic, like demographic shift. He cites China specifically as being another example of a population. And a part of that was like political policies that they've had for decades of, not having large families, because of the size of their population at one point. There are just a lot of scenarios where it might be that this productivity gain, as it evolves over time, augments, some of the just like underlying situations that are developing as a result of being in a developed and established economy and lower birth rates and that sort of thing. So it was fascinating. I would definitely encourage people to listen. I'm going to probably listen to it again. I mean, I tend to learn more kind of on a second go around, but at the end of the day, I don't know exactly what to expect. You can see a compelling case for negativity. You can definitely see a compelling case for a positive outcome. My guess is you're going to have elements of both that end up playing out as they go forward. We talked about the mass layoffs tied to AI. I think those types of things are going to be realities that happen from time to time. I don't expect that that's going to be the only, scenario that plays out and everybody loses or many people lose jobs and we're in this low employment and like really financially strained scenario. But it's fun to think about, Mark, but man, it's hard to know exactly how to expect it to all play out when it's said and done.
I am so glad that you highlighted the points. I think it was a major theme of the podcast with Marc Andreessen was that we need this lift. We have a lot of natural demographic forces that really challenge the economy. And Elon is out there saying that we can't recover from this national debt. I mean, the only way to do it is to print your way out or, robot agentic, sort of massive gains in GDP. We've just, trillions of dollars of debts are not repayable. In the bureaucracy isn't such where whatever drastic steps would need to be taken can be taken. They just won't. So I think it's sort of along the same lines as Marc Andreessen there. It's like we're going to need this lift. This is how we get out of some of the credit cycle messes that we've created for ourselves. What an optimistic deal that just in the nick of time we are doing that. Oh, Jeff, there was a thought too, and I think Mark made this comment. I'm just now thinking about it and I didn't take notes of it. This is the end of the podcast. I hate to be making it here, but for the 5 people that made it to the end of this, maybe it'll be worth it. But, it was talking about Sir Isaac Newton as a, well-known inventor, discoverer, and what isn't talked about a lot. And I think he was commissioned by a king in the field of alchemy, and it was converting lead to gold, essentially, a very plentiful resource in figuring out chemically how to turn it into something very valuable. And he spent his millions of words, Isaac Newton wrote on this. Of course, never made that happen. We have since, I think, proved that it can happen one way or another. But he was talking about this obsession with humankind of trying to take something that's very rare and turning it into something very valuable, and so this is not just Isaac Newton, it's just a prominent example of it. And I mean, it sort of gives me goosebumps describing now what has happened here. Silicon, the material that is put into chips, is ultimately made of sand. It is the material that can conduct electricity on the very fine and small nano scale that these AI chips require. And so he is basically saying that what we have figured out how to do over the last 30 years is convert sand into thought. And that image is just incredible to me, because it's inarguable. That is essentially what has happened. Sure, there are other elements that are combined to make that happen. But at the end of the day, we have taken like the most common thing on planet Earth, and maybe also existing on other planets, and converted it into thought. Wow, what a world. What a world. Interesting times indeed.
It really is. I think I actually kind of like the idea of having a little Easter egg nugget at the very end of the podcast, so that there's maybe an incentive for people to listen. But that example just highlighted, I'm glad you thought or remembered it, Mark, just the breadth of like the perspective that he had, taking these historical examples and this desire to take, at the time, abundant lead and convert it into something, valuable and rare. He's like, well, we've done that. Like we do that today with converting silicon, which is, infinitely abundant essentially on Earth, and convert that into intelligence or like productive things that everybody has access to and can use. It was just a really cool framing of what, we're looking at in the technological landscape that we live in today. I'm glad you thought of that. It really was a cool framing of the kind of magic that we were able to see, and we just kind of take for granted in the moment. I've often thought, if you went back 200 years and tried to explain to people how you could even just talk on a cell phone, sending signals to space and back, it would sound like black magic or something crazy. And I don't even think we understand fully like how some of the stuff we just use every single day actually works. But this artificial intelligence is definitely on the bleeding edge of what we're able to do as humans. And it's certainly a fun time to be living and tracking it.
Well, Jeff, there it is. A full hour of two uninteresting guys talking about artificial intelligence, futurism, speculation. Nobody asked for it, but we have given it to the masses, and I enjoyed it. I don't think it'll be the last time we do it. I hope this step away from the practical is useful for the listeners, and I did enjoy it, if nothing else.
You and I did, and we've talked about this multiple times, but these conversations really are enjoyable for us, and we hope that some are enjoying them along the way as well, and grateful for the support that comes. But uninteresting, guys, interesting topics and times. Mark, I look forward to doing it again.
Talk to you soon, Jeff.